Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
This reading comes from Matthew 25:14 through 30. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 talents went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. So also the one with 2 talents gained 2 more. But the man who had received the 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 talents brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with 2 talents also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 talents. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received the 1 talent came. Master, he said, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you had not sown and gathering where you had not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gathered where I had not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit within the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has, will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading and hearing of his word.
Thank you, Sophie. When I was Sophie's age in high school, I had a terrible habit. I could not keep up with pens. I mean, they were like water in my hands. Like they just flowed right through my fingers. You know, like I misplaced them, leave them in one classroom. As I moved to the next classroom, I was constantly short on pens. On top of that, I had a second bad habit, and that was that I like to chew pens. I chew the tops, the little clip thing. I mean, I would just chew them all to pieces. And so if I asked one of my classmates, at the desk next to me, hey, can I borrow your pen? They had seen my pens before. The last thing they were going to do is give me a pen because it goes straight to my mouth. So no one would ever loan me a pen either. My mom hated this. She hated how I lost pens. She hated how I chewed them. And she thought, I'm going to do something to change this pattern in my son's life, to help him realize the value of a pen. So in her mind, the problem was that all the pens I had were cheap. They were disposable. They didn't have any value. If I just had a pen of great value, then I would respect it a lot more. And so she gave me a gift of a beautiful cross pen. I remember the wooden box it came in, and it wasn't just that the pen had monetary value. For my mom, it had sentimental value because it was given to her by her dad, who was no longer living. Her dad, when she graduated from college more than 2 decades prior. And so she gave me this pen, and she impressed upon me how important it was and how valuable it was, and said, I want you to learn to keep up with this pen. I lost it within 24 hours. I kid you not. I took it to school the next day. It was, by second period, it was gone, right? And my mom was furious. I mean, so mad at me. And in my defense, I just said, Mom, you knew I can't hold on to a pen. Why would you put something of that much value into my hands? I don't know that we ever resolved that fight, except it happened and we just moved past it. But I tell the story now to say it's somewhat like the story that Jesus told. Because in the story, you have a great master who places things of great value in his servants' hands. And some of the servants recognize the value of the gift and they use it appropriately, and one does not. And so the story prompts for us questions about what do we do with the gifts God gives us? And what do we do? And what we do with those gifts really tells the story in some ways of our lives. I know it's a very familiar story, the parable of the talent, so I won't go piece by piece, but just let me make a few observations. And the first one's going to seem so obvious, you wonder why I'd even point it out. And the first observation is this, that the master gives and the servants receive, which sounds obvious, right? But the point is that what the servants have is not their own money. Everything they have to work with belongs to the master, and at some point they know they have to return it. And so it prompts for us, right off the bat, the question of ownership. All the stuff we have, all the things we try to manage and keep track of in life, just who does it belong to? It may be our name on the bank account or on the mortgage or deed. It may be our name, next to all these things, but does it really belong to us? We feel like it should. And we work hard, we earn, we manage, we save. It should belong to us, but the teaching from Scripture, the testimony and perspective it brings is that nothing we have belongs to us. It all belongs to God. And you can't name anything in your life that wasn't given to you by God. God gave you your physical body. God gave you your physical abilities. God gave you your mental abilities. God gave you your relationships, all the people who are important to you, friends, family, co-workers, your capacity, the opportunities you've had in your life, all of it comes from the God who created you. It all belongs to him. And this isn't meant to be bad news, like that God's taking things away from you. No, not at all. It's meant to be good news, because when it all belongs to us, our tendency is to want to hold on super tight. And we worry and we fret and we're filled with anxiety. But understanding it's a gift from a loving God who entrusts it to us, that helps us to open our hands up, to handle our lives with the open palms of gratitude and generosity. Because when we remember that, we remember at some point, we shouldn't hold on to it, because at some point we have to let go and return it back to God, or hand it off to those who will carry forward our legacy. It's not ours to keep. It's only ours to manage with humility and grace as best we can. So the master gives, but then the next observation of the story is that the master does not give equally. And this is the part of the story that we fundamentally do not like, because it seems unfair, right? I mean, why would the master give one person 5, another person 2, and another person 1? Doesn't that just seem wrong from the beginning? But notice what Jesus says. He says, the master gives to each person, each according to his ability. You see, the master is an accurate judge of each person's capacity, and he gives to them according to their capacity, so that no one is overwhelmed with the gift, with the wealth that he's entrusted to them. Each has exactly what they can handle. And in some ways, this is true of life today, right? I know there are some people in our world and society who have more money than they know what to do with, and they spend it in frivolous ways. But in terms of responsibility, we tend to distribute responsibility to people, each according to his or her ability. If you're starting out in a company or an organization, typically you're giving a small amount of responsibility and trust. But if you faithfully do what you say you're going to do, then people say, oh, they can do more, and they give you more opportunity, more responsibility. And so each of us grows to reach our full capacity. So the question that we bring to this text shouldn't be, why did the master distribute money unequally? As if that's unusual in our world. No, the question we should bring to the text is how much have we received? On that spectrum from 5 to 1, just where are we? What has God entrusted into our hands? And once you do that, then that changes the perspective entirely, because then you begin to realize God has blessed us with far more than we realize or need. There's this website. I encourage you, write down the website in your sermon notes, and it's called the Global Rich List, www.globalrichlist.com. And if you go to the website, it looks something like that, and then there's a little space below that'll just give you space to enter either your income or your wealth, however you want to calculate it. And then what it does is then it tells you, as soon as you enter in your income or your wealth, it tells you how you compare to the rest of the world. Because the reality is, for most of us, we tend to be aware of those who have more than us. We are less aware of those who have less. And so the Global Rich List kind of points us out. You go to after you enter, you get kind of pictures that look like this. Let me just say, those are not my numbers. Those are numbers I just pulled off the internet randomly. So, but they're not far from where I was. It'll tell you where you rank in terms of percentage, richest people in the world by income. It'll tell you how many doctors your income could support in Kazakhstan. The one that hit me was, it told me that my income, which sometimes we struggle to kind of stretch and pull to cover all of our needs and expenses as a family, that my income, it would take a worker in Indonesia 168 years to earn the same amount I earn in 1 year. And that's humbling. It reminds me that God gives generously. The master may not give equally, but he gives generously. He gives more than any of us need in this lifetime. He gives us more than we need so that we can share it with others. To even the servant who only got one talent. We always think, poor guy, he only got one talent. We don't understand that a talent was a huge sum of money in that day and age. A talent was equal to 15 years of labor. Not 168, but still 15 is pretty darn good. It's more money than the servant has ever seen in his lifetime. And so he doesn't have to be stuck in a feeling of scarcity and survival. I don't have enough. I didn't get as much as the others got. No, he still has more than he could ever need in order to invest and grow that. Then it gets me a third observation. The master gives. He gives generously, but he also gives with an expectation. He tells them, someday I'm going to come back, and when I come back, I want to see what you've done with this money I've put in your hands. The master's expectation is that the money would grow, that he would get a return on the investment he's made. I remember when Jamel and I, early in our marriage, I think it was when our kids were born, that we went and said, we each had kind of investments, family investments, pocketed in different places. We thought, we need to pull this all together in one place, and we met with a financial planner. And if you guys have ever done this process before, the financial planner asks you questions. Well, what are your goals? What do you want in life? And here are the targets that you have to hit so that your kids can go to college someday. And here's the targets you got to hit in order to retire well and at whatever age that you're wanting to retire. And then after we created this plan, we turned over all of our investments to that person to manage, right? And that person sends us reports. We get monthly reports from the different funds it's invested in. We get quarterly reports from the manager himself. And why do they do that? Because they want to show us, here's what you entrusted to us, and here's how they're growing. Because we as investors have that expectation that what we put in isn't just we're not going to lose it, and we're not going to stay static, but over time, it's going to grow in order to reach the goals that we set together. The master has the same kind of expectations of his servants, that he puts things in their hands in order for them to grow. The first two servants get this. They understand. So when they receive their talents, either 5 or 2, they invest them, and they invest them wisely. They get an amazing return, not just 10% or 20%, but 100% growth. They double what they receive from the master. And the master says, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into your blessing. The third servant, though, doesn't understand this expectation. Maybe he looks, around at the other servants and says, well, I don't have as much of them. I can't do all the things that they could do. Perhaps he's scared. He scares risking the one talent he has. His margin for loss isn't as big as the others, but for whatever reason, he takes his talent and he buries it in the ground. But remember, a talent is a huge sum of money. The problem is not how much money the master gave the servant. The problem is that the servant doesn't understand the master's heart or the master's intention. He thinks all he's supposed to do is protect and hold the money and return it back someday. He doesn't understand that it's seed money that the master has placed in his hands, that the master wants it to grow and compound. I once read a book by, I can't remember the author's name, but he was speaking about giving and church finances and what have you. And anyways, this author did something I never heard of before. He said since his early 20s, he started tracking how much he gave and how much he saved and how much he spent. But what was interesting about it, he says, when I track my investments, I see the compounded interest, what happens year over year and how those investments grow. He said, I decided to take the same approach to my giving. So all those dollars that I invest by giving them away, I imagine what return they would have had they been invested in the stock market or mutual funds or whatever. And then he tracks not only what he gives every year, but he tracks the compounded interest on all those things in order to see that fund grow and grow and grow. And I thought, wow, that's kind of like cheating, isn't it? Like, I could feel pretty good about my giving if I'm just counting all the compounded interest. But he said, I do it for two reasons. One, he said, I had the goal in my life that I wanted my giving account to be just as large as my retirement account. That I wanted over the years to give just as much as I was setting aside to retire someday. And so that was admirable. He says, but the second reason I did it is I wanted to remind myself that giving compounds. That giving early matters because you give more time for those ripple effects to go out. He said, when we invest in someone's life, either financially or emotionally or relationally, when we invest in their life early on and they grow and are changed and impacted by that, then they take that love, they take that investment, and then they turn it around and use it in the world. You never know how the life you impact, whether it's by sponsoring a child, whether it's by building a wheelchair ramp, whether it's by volunteering at a local school as a reading buddy. But when you invest in someone's life, you never know how the difference you make in their life will then be paid forward and make a difference somewhere else in the world. Giving compounds. I was trying to think of an example of this, and I remembered a story that I read years ago about a ministry called World Vision. If you're not familiar with World Vision, it's one of the largest humanitarian organizations in the world, a Christian organization. And one of the things you can do through World Vision is you can sponsor a child, $25, $30 a month, something like that. And I remember this story I read a number of years ago about a woman who sponsored a child in Africa. And then this child excelled in school and went on to become a doctor. In fact, did his studies here in the United States at Harvard Medical School. And went on to have this very successful career. And then 40 years later, he met the woman who had sponsored him. And the reason he met her is that he went back to the village where he'd grown up in Africa, and he established a foundation to pay or to support children who've been orphaned by AIDS. And he named the foundation after the woman who had sponsored him all those years ago. And it was such a cool story. And so I went to their website to try to research it, make sure I could get the names right and show you pictures of it. And I couldn't find any of it. So I will keep researching. Instead, I found a different story, perhaps one that is even more powerful. The founder of World Vision is a man named Bob Pierce. He passed away in the late 70s. And the story I found was written by his daughter, Mary Lee. And Mary Lee kind of starts by reflecting on three missionary women whom she writes and says, when my father first traveled to China, was first feeling a call into ministry and missionary work, he met these three different women on his travels through China, and how each one impacted his life and perhaps gave him the vision and footprint of what World Vision would someday become. And so she talks about these women and the impact they had, and then she says, but then there was a fourth woman. And this fourth woman was Miss Elizabeth Sales. Hunter was her maiden name. And so she says that woman isn't in any of the history books. She never traveled outside of the country at all. The only hungry children she ever fed were those who came to her dinner table. She said, but Miss Hunter was my father's Sunday school teacher when he was in high school. And she had heard through all the years her dad talk about Miss Hunter and how she planted the seed in his life that grew into a call to ministry. But she never really fully understood the impact she had on her father's life until after her father died. And she was going through her father's stuff, through all of his records, and she found a small blue book that was entitled James Hudson Taylor, Pioneer Missionary of Inland China. Not the most gripping title. But on the first page, when she turned it over, she found an inscription that was dated Christmas 1928, and it read, "To Bob, from Miss Hunter. My prayer and deepest desire for you is Matthew 28:18-20. Therefore go and make disciples of all the nations." And then she writes, "Your prayers have been answered, Miss Hunter." You never know when you invest in one person's life, how the ripple effects of that one life, how that ripple effects of that one gift will extend out into the world. Generosity compounds with time. So the question I think this parable asks us is the simple question of, is the master good? Is God good? The third servant does not think so. He's kind of caught up in comparing his gift to the other gifts. He's caught up in scarcity and survival. And he says to the master, I knew you were a hard man, that you planted, or that you reaped where you did not plant, that you gathered where you did not sow. I knew this about you. And then he receives punishment. It's almost like that punishment he receives as a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because the third servant missed the generosity of the master. He missed the whole point of the exercise. He says, I knew that you harvest where you had not sown. But does that make the master not generous? Does that make the master not good? No. The master provides the seed so that we, the servants, can sow and plant and nurture and reap, so that we might participate in this great goodness that God wants to start in the world. God gives so that we might invest and share, so that that goodness can keep growing and compounding in the world. This is what the master wants for our lives and for the world around us. The master is good and generous, and he wants us to be the same. So then the second question I think this parable prompts for us is, with what have you been entrusted? The master is good, but the master also holds us accountable for the gifts that he places in our hands. And yes, that means your financial resources. What God has given you financially, how are you using it? Are you sharing it with others? I know for a lot of us on that spectrum from survival to generosity, a lot of us feel like we are stuck in survival mode. We're just trying to get by, we're trying to pay the bills, we're trying to get ahead. And if that's where you are, that's okay. just know that that's not the Father's desire for you to stay in that place. I mean, that's why we're offering classes like Financial Peace University, because it takes work and discipline to control our spending in order to move out of survival into a place where we can be generous and free and share with others. So if you have find yourself in that place, by all means, join the Financial Peace University class. They just started 2 weeks ago. You can catch up Wednesday nights. That's a good place to start. It's good and noble work to work your way out of survival. But when I think about what God has entrusted to me, I'll be honest, money is way down on the list. My list starts with family, my children, my marriage, my brother, my mom, the relationships that mean most, my friendships, people who've been good to me throughout the years, who've made a big difference in my life. I think about this church and the awesome and wonderful responsibility to be your pastor, to lead and guide you. I think about my physical body and my health. That's mine to steward and no one else's. The reality is the list goes on and on and on because it's all 100% gift. And God's desire for me and God's desire for you is that we would be good stewards of the gifts which he has given. And so I ask myself, how generous am I being in my relationships? Am I giving more than I'm taking? Am I there for people when they need me? How generous am I with my time? How generous am I with my resources? God has entrusted good things to each of us. And the Master's desire is for us to take those gifts and invest them and share them with others, that the cycle of good may keep on going in the world. So what has God entrusted to you? What's on your list? My prayer for you and my prayer for me is that we may live in such a way that the good we do today would grow and compound and live on long after we're gone. To use Bob's phrase, that the trees we plant today may provide shelter and shade to those who come after. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.